Okay, our next interview is with Kenneth Rendell. He is a autograph dealer of more than just a little import. In my opinion, he is probably the greatest autograph dealer of my generation, and an author, a lecturer, and a person who is very interested in World War II, to the extent that he has created a museum. And I'll get to that a little bit later, Ken. But would you like to just give us some background on, where you come from, your education, your family, and what got you involved in the autograph trade?
Well, the autograph business to me was a continuation of my collecting. And I had started collecting presidential letters in the late 1950s. And what I really liked about letters was that you really got to see people as complete people. They had their problems, they had the ups and downs in their lives. It wasn't a sanitized version. It was the day-to-day life that they led. And in many cases, the letters were extremely important, and in many cases, they're complaining about their kids. But it was real life. And I became a dealer so that I could see more of these. My own family background is that I come from a crummy section of Boston.
Somerville?
Somerville. It's a place to have been from.
Although
not these days, it's very high end.
I know.
It's changed significantly. I have a wonderful education going to night school at Boston University, which I paid for by working during the day. And I never graduated because I couldn't waste the money on the required courses. I had to get on with life.
I remember back in the late 50s going into the basement in that Somerville house and looking at stuff. And Ken and I go back a long time. We have some mutual interests. But I'd like to just ask you, Ken, how do you see the Internet as in the autograph? Is the Internet something that has helped or hurt or done nothing as far as the autograph business is concerned?
I think that, in a sense, the autograph business is broken up into different segments. What I'd call the research end, the higher content, archives, groups of letters is one segment. Then there has been for the last 50 years a developing business in pieces or signatures of interesting people without any real content, but framing them and presenting them to people who are very interested in that author or time period or whatever. But somebody is not building a collection the way when I started out. People built serious collections, so-called. But in many cases, I found people buying the couple of things to hang on their wall, much more excited than the guy who had his own library at an Ivy League school, who was buying hundreds of letters by a particular author, and who was really very blasé about the whole thing. Then there's the whole area of movie stars, celebrity kind of stuff. Sports stuff where you really have no rational reason to believe that it's genuine.
Yeah, I understand that.
And there was a law passed in New York some years ago about having to give a certificate of authenticity with things. And I was asked, fortunately, to be involved in this legislation, which I thought was nonsense. And then I was asked to appear at the Downtown Sportsman's Club in New York, where the Attorney General was putting all this forward. And he asked me to talk about it. And he said, I want you to talk about the reason for the legislation. I said, well, the reason is you're running for the Senate. That's why this is going on. And he said, no, and he was kind of annoyed. And I thought, I'm going to get this guy. And so I started off by saying, collecting sports autographs is like going to professional wrestling. It requires a complete suspension of disbelief. Yeah. And that's what that stuff is. And that stuff's selling on the Internet. If people want to believe it, they can believe it. But I have found myself, which I thought would never happen, that I have an extremely good website for the business. We have a lot of inventory, thousands of pieces on there, with photographs, and it pays. We sell. I'm quite amazed that people in Australia, Hong Kong...
People you never know about without the Internet.
And and they're buying. And I don't know that, I suppose if I read my website, I would believe it, because after all, I wrote it.
Yeah.
But I read other people's websites who have been in my business as long as I have been, but I never heard of them until 10 years ago. Yeah. And I wouldn't buy anything from their website. So the internet, I think that it is necessary as we go forward, but I think it also has helped the proliferation of this other area of autographs that are of dubious authenticity.
How do you respond to those who say that in this generation of emails, there will be a dearth of autograph material in the future?
It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. I mean, I think that my field kind of ends in 1970, 75, when the auto pen really comes in.
Yeah.
And you really can't believe what you get. And it's really interesting that with the Bush administration, now emails don't exist, which is taking it even further.
Yeah, they seem to disappear, don't
They've
they?
disappeared.
But I think that may be a real problem for people who would like to be an autograph dealer in the future. Where is the material coming from?
Yeah, I mean, people have to be thinking up until 1975, and there'll be exceptions of people who write letters. But I mean, if you think of your own life, the amount of mail we send out, we fax it or email it.
I don't remember the last time I wrote a letter physically wrote a letter. I can't remember. And I suppose I'm not any different than most other people. Ken, you have a rather successful shop right in downtown New York. Tell us a little bit about how you decided to do it, and does it pay? Is it something you want to continue with?
It started because in the 1960s, I would sell all of the non-content material to a department store called B. Altman, which started the whole concept of frameable autographs, along with Hamilton, Charles Hamilton. Yeah. Hamilton had much more of a flourish, and the frames with Hamilton were more elaborate, the presentation was more elaborate. Altman's was much more down to earth. The frames, let's say they're frames that today would cost $200. So there was nothing elaborate. They focused on the letter or the document, and they were a very significant client of mine. I mean, every month I would sell them a significant amount of material. The department store was sold. The new owners didn't want any departments that didn't have set markups and didn't, fit. Yeah. So they closed that department. They closed their antiques department. They closed a number of departments. And I went into business with the guy who ran the department, and we opened an upstairs gallery on West 57th Street, which was really just carrying over the Altman's clients. Then he wanted to go on his own, and he didn't really want to turn up 10 to 6 every day or 10 to 5. And it turned out to was really good for me, that we broke up that business, and I went into the Place des Antiquariens, which was a group of antique dealers, in a sense like a mall on East 57th.
I remember that.
It was a really good concept, but the dealers spent so much time fighting with each other as to who got more featured in ads than other people did, instead of understanding that the auction process was the biggest enemy that we had. And the whole thing imploded with infighting. The landlord got sick of it. But by then, I had opened up on Upper Madison Avenue at 76th Street. And you have to run it as a real business. It isn't a joke that when people offer me a large document, something 2 feet by 3 feet, and I say to them, well, you know how much that wall space costs? I know how much, and I know I can hang 4 pieces on that wall space. And it has to be run as a very real business, because if you have a few bad months, you're falling behind, well, in our case, at least $100,000.
It's a significant case.
Yeah, so it's a real business, and you have real employees who have to be paid real New York salaries. So it's a very significant commitment.
You mentioned just briefly a few seconds ago about the auction experience having an adverse effect, I think you indicated. Could you expand on that a little bit? How does the auction experience affect an autograph dealer and the autograph business?
Well, I think it's affecting everybody.
Well, yeah, but
it's affecting dealers of all types because the auction mentality is extremely seductive. If you don't know what to do when you're selling something, well, put up at auction. That's a normal reaction. I mean, why sort out all the dealers if you don't know who the dealers are in any particular field? And there's always the idea that if you're buying at auction, well, you only can be wrong by one bid. Because after all, somebody else knew what something was worth.
Maybe.
And my favorite story was during a Sang sale in 1976. There was the Enola Gay logbook was sold under World War II right at the end of the sale. I was meeting Malcolm Forbes to go out to dinner afterwards. I was in the hallway when that sold, and I heard it brought $76,500. And when I saw Forbes downstairs, I said, Malcolm, who in the world paid that? He said, I did. I said, well, wow. And he said, well, there was an underbidder. Well, many years later, I was having dinner with a guy named Harry Spiro, who became a very big collector, T.E. Lawrence, and other things. And I said, Harry, how did you get into this? And he said, well, I collected paintings. And one day, I'm at Sotheby's, and this auction's going on, and I looked at a catalog that was hanging on the wall, and I saw Malcolm Forbes bidding on the Enola Gay. And I thought, I don't know what that's worth. And I said, really? I said, what happened? He said, well, I bid $70,000, and, I figured Forbes knew what he was doing. So I wrote Forbes a letter, and I said, well, I want you both to know, that at $30,000, we both left reality. But there's that seductive nature that somebody else knows better. But the destructive nature of auctions, as far as everybody's concerned, is that dealers make the market, and dealers introduce collectors, and dealers give advice, and dealers are always there. Auction houses that are working on low commissions can't really do any of those things. And so it's an efficient process in one way, but it's not efficient in terms of introducing people, helping people to collect, none of that. And it's almost akin to the computer business. If you have Dell computers working only on manufacturing, doing no research and development of anything, well, eventually there are no innovations whatsoever. Right. And sure, you get a cheap laptop, but nothing ever improves on anything. And, I think in this field, yeah, you can get auction commissions down to a low level, but you're never going to get anybody introduced because there's nobody to talk to them.
Yeah. Could you just talk a little bit about one of the more famous things that you were involved with, the so-called Hitler diaries? Could you give us like about 2 or 3 minute capsule of that situation, if it's possible?
The Hitler diaries are the greatest example of people's will to believe. They were really bad forgeries, but it was a great hoax. And it's just like a magic show where the magician is distracting you. He's getting you to look at what he wants you to look at. In the Hitler diaries, there was money involved, there was market share, Newsweek is beating out Time, they're focusing on where do we run the Holocaust, where's that going to sell best, do we run it up front? Nobody was paying. I mean, they did have all these expert reports that they were genuine, but these people had really not done a very thorough job. They were actually really bad forgeries, but it was a great hoax. The perpetrator of this basically had created one volume along with a lot of other fake Nazi stuff that he sold to a collector in Stuttgart, Germany. A reporter for Stern magazine saw this one volume of Hitler diaries and wanted to buy it for Stern magazine to publish it, and said, well, there must be more than one. And the guy said, well, that's what he had. So, well, could you contact this, whoever you got it from? And Stern magazine bugged his phone, found out who the contact was.
Really? They bugged his phone?
Oh, yeah. These people really played rough. And the guys from Stern magazine go to see this guy in Stuttgart, this military dealer named Kuyau, who has since died. And I have hanging in what I call my catalog library the sign from outside his door that was sold at an auction in Germany last year.
Oh, really?
I thought it was a great souvenir.
Oh, it is. Sensational souvenir.
So they go in and say, well, there must be more diaries. And the guy never thought of that. And he said, yes. So, well, there must be one for every year. And the guy said, of course. and well, where are they coming from? The guy said, well, I can't tell you. I mean, the guy hadn't ever thought of the answers, let alone the questions.
Right.
And they said, well, it must be coming from the East. And that's why you can't tell us. And we said, well,
Sure.
I can't tell you. They provided all the answers, all the way through.
Really?
And they even tracked a crash of a plane carrying Hitler's stuff that did crash in East Germany. I mean, they did everything, everything. And everything they wanted, they got. This guy was just churning it out. It was amazing. Very much like the Mormon forger in a way.
I was going to get to that. I was going to ask you if you'd talk a little bit about the Mark Hoffman forgeries that presented such a great case, and murder involved as well.
Yeah, Mark Hoffman is an advance on the Hitler diaries, even though it's just 2 years later, because Mark Hoffman was a good forger.
Oh, yeah.
And Mark Hoffman also really knew how to do provenance, and he understood the business. So Hoffman really had all the elements that as to how somebody would expect to find things, what was logical, what would cause people not to wonder. Hoffman was really good. Yet Hoffman made a lot of mistakes that when you put a Hoffman forgery next to the real thing, you know something's wrong.
Yeah.
The ink isn't crisp enough. And there's a real unevenness in Hoffman's forgeries. Some of them are really good. Some of them are really poor. The materials are poor. The ink shifts badly. There's some of them he used chemical to fix the ink, but then it fluoresced the wrong color. But I mean, normally you wouldn't be using an ultraviolet light to see what color as to how it would fluoresce. But Hoffman, I think, is as good as there has been uncovered.
In your career,
Yeah.
Someone once told me that Thomas Wise was in his era, the Hoffman of his era.
Yeah, I don't know that much about printing, so I mean, I wouldn't presume to comment about.
Well, we've got about like 5 or 6 minutes left, and what I'd like you to do, if you don't mind, is talk somewhat about this wonderful museum that you've created. Why, where the material's coming from, how you got it, what got you going, and just reiterate the wonderful thing you're doing.
Well, I think that there are a lot of generic things about the museum that I think are important for people to relate to. Whether people have any interest in World War II, which is really the history of the 20th century.
Yeah, our greatest history.
And in fact, if you want to understand what's going on in the country today, you can see events in the 1930s and see a lot of parallels, which is very interesting because the Bush administration attributes all of their actions acting outside the Constitution to World War II events, that Franklin Roosevelt acted outside the Constitution. People today go back to World War II all the time for everything, for justifications, but not for an understanding of events and of people. But I think what the World War II Museum shows is how you can take a subject and collect everything that relates to it to really paint a very complete picture. And it starts with ephemera and photographs, printed broadsides, posters, the books, leaflets, letters, and all the way through code machines, everything that newspapers, everything that constitutes life. And the museum has collections of magazines, archives, literally everything. And the museum has every gun from World War II, but it's not a gun collection at all. It's a collection to show and preserve as much as possible what the reality was, with no political point of view at all. There's absolutely no political commentary in the museum, no sign indicates anything. An argument can be made that the fact that I choose to exhibit something shows my prejudice, but I hope there wasn't any prejudice at all. And I don't know what other areas you could still do this in. I don't think there are any areas of the importance of World War II. But when, in the 1960s and 70s, when I represented every university library, and I used to try to get people to collect World War II. There were archives I thought that we could get, propaganda collections. Nobody was interested. Really? Nobody wanted this stuff. Today it's a whole different story. World War II is popular, and in a way it shows how you need a period of time. Whether in 1960 it's 30 years afterwards, it's too fresh in people's minds. Either they were in the war and they don't want to collect it. Their parents had been really affected. Yeah. It was too close to home. But that is when you need to collect it. Right now, Vietnam should be collected. The war protest movement should be collected. People are going to start hitting an age where they die. It'll just be thrown away. It'll be in attics. The kids won't appreciate it. And it'll be gone.
Your museum is not open to the public. It's by sort of like invitation only, one might say. And you have groups who come out and examine the artifacts. My favorite thing at the museum is the tank. I'm not a big guy. I can barely fit in there. And I'm trying to figure out how all these people got in this thing to begin with.
Five people.
I still don't understand how. It's just amazing. And you have that wonderful... is that serving set from Berchtesgaden?
Yeah.
And then when you ring the doorbell, it's a submarine diving. So it's just great. And I think more people should know about its existence and what you do. But would you tell the story about, you told me at one time there was some boat or something that somebody was going to throw away, or I can't remember quite what it was.
The landing craft?
Yeah, the landing craft.
Yeah, there's a landing craft behind the museum. Is 10,000 square feet of display area. And behind it is a landing craft that was in the Pacific. There are only 5 landing craft from World War II left. I mean, that's it. Because they were made out of plywood. In a sense, they were disposable. And this one was used as a fishing boat in Alaska. And basically it was going to rot out in Valdez, Alaska. And a guy recognized what it was. It had a superstructure built on it. And he was trying to sell it for a lot of money. But everybody he offered it to sent the emails on to me. And I said, you got to get it from Alaska to Boston.
Yeah, wow.
And we finally worked out a deal. And I said, well, I didn't really know what I could pay him. Because, all the shipping. I mean, sending a book is
one thing.
Easy. Moving landing craft's another. And finally I said, well, how much credit card debt do you have? And he told me, and I said, I'll pay it off. I said, is that a good enough deal? And he said, yeah. And he came down from $750,000 to $5.
That's quite a discount.
It's a significant discount. But what the museum does in terms of visitation, we have a lot of people coming every day. There's a full-time person in charge of visitors who's a retired cop and a former Marine. But we have a problem with too many visitors. And people have to tell us why they want to come. Because I don't want people who are just interested in guns. Veterans are always welcome, but they have to have appointments. Because no museum that is really intimate in any way can have too many people start at one time.
Right.
And I've had 25 people at one time to go through. And that is a very large group because people get in front of a case and they block it for other people. Yeah. And the museum is set up chronologically, so I need people to go through in a flow. And I don't want them going, I don't allow people to go backwards because then they end up meeting somewhere around D-Day.
Yeah, which is not good.
And it totally jams up, and you can't get by each other. But we have a lot of different groups. I mean, this coming week, I don't allow school children at all. I don't want any kids in the museum. The war's not for kids. This isn't entertainment. Yeah. But I have a Brown University group this week. I have a Wellesley College group. we're basically doing classes at the museum. We have Holocaust survivor groups. We have veterans groups. We have a lot of things that go on at the museum. I'm always telling people all the things that you can't do and that we don't do.
Yeah.
But things like Flags of Our Fathers, the entire storyline of Flags of Our Fathers came from the museum.
Right.
The guy everything in Flags of Our Fathers is based on the only last surviving Navy corpsman. No one knows what happened to Bradley, whose the story was about, because he died without ever telling his story. And Eastwood got the entire story that he used from the guy who only told his story one time. And he was a dinner speaker at the museum. So I love having those kind of connections and getting those stories out. And the museum is very involved in getting across the story of the nightmare of warfare.
Yeah. It is a nightmare.
If you don't come back wounded or maimed or dead, you're supposed to be lucky. But people came back so psychologically destroyed.
Incredibly. Well, it's been I wish we could talk for hours about this, Ken, but thanks very much for this 30-minute capsule, and keep up the good work, and I'll enjoy coming back to the museum at some point.
Thanks for doing this, Mike.
Okay, thank you.